All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Can. I'm here with Lyngso, and we've got a Master Gardener talk today. It will be presented by Janice Moody, and Janice has been a Master Gardener since 2010, and she's the owner of Seascapes Garden Design and Seascape Succulents Nursery in Half Moon Bay. And she specializes in year-round colorful water-wise gardens where she has many succulents, drought tolerant plants, and California natives. So the talk is obviously the secrets to successful succulent landscaping. And Janice will go over a little bit about who the Master Gardeners are, and we'll start the talk. So welcome, Janice.
Hello, everyone out there in Cyberland. This is such a strange experience for me, but I'm getting used to it after doing this 3 or 4 times. But I know you're out there. I'm trying to envision feedback. So I hope my ultimate goal today is to share my knowledge and spread my enthusiasm of gardening to you. And I hope you come away with a larger database of knowledge than we started with. So let's get started. And my pointer and my, excuse me, things are, okay. Excuse my clumsiness here. Who are the Master Gardeners? We are trained by the University of California, and we are volunteers and certified by them to provide community service and educational outreach that helps home gardeners and community organizations garden sustainably and create a healthy environment at the same time. And if you're interested in becoming a Master Gardener, you can follow this link that I have on this slide, or look up Master Gardeners of San Francisco and San Mateo counties, and you can learn about when our next group of classes are going to begin. It's once a week for about 15 weeks, and it's a wealth of knowledge. And then you just volunteer your time to the community and continue learning every day that you are part of the Master Gardener presentation. Excuse me, I'm just fumbling with some technicalities now. I'm not seeing myself when I talk. Now I see myself, excuse me. So next up, our learning goals today are to introduce you to succulents, give you a basic introduction and definition of succulents, give you some pre-planting considerations and why you don't want to get a bunch of succulents and then try to figure out where to plant them. There'll be a question and answer after that segment, and then we'll move on to landscape design and give you some elements of design that you can use in your own gardens. And then we'll have a Q&A, and then I'll discuss care and maintenance tips after that, and another Q&A. And then I've also done a YouTube succulent propagation video, and it won't show well during this Zoom presentation. They don't do well. There's timing differences. So I'll be providing that link to you in the last slide, and you feel free to view that 13-minute slide at your leisure afterwards. So today we won't be covering container gardening, house plants, or art projects, or cactus, because I'm in Half Moon Bay, California, and we don't grow a lot of cactus in Half Moon Bay. We have a very temperate climate here, and cactus do better in hotter environments. And also, I don't like working around them in particular because I don't like getting stuck. So it's not my favorite plant. So we'll save that for another topic. Another Master Gardener can cover that at another time. Now, what is a succulent? Well, it's a drought-resistant plant that stores water in its leaves, stems, or roots. An example of that would be, let's say, cactus stores water in their stems. Aloe store water in their leaves primarily, and some in their roots as well, a little bit. Now, leaves and stems would be Echeverias and Aeoniums. As you see down here in the lower left corner, that's Aeoniums, and this is an aloe, a spiral aloe up here in the upper right. And then at the bottom lower right, we have elephant foot palm, and that holds their water in the actual root system. So let's just discuss briefly, what are the pros and cons of incorporating succulents in your landscape? Well, first of all, they're very drought tolerant, more so than many plants out there. And they can offer year-round color and interest just with their foliage. You don't need the flowers necessarily to have color year-round. They're relatively gopher and deer resistant, not 100%, but relatively. They're usually very easy to transplant, and they're very easy to propagate on your own, as you will see if you watch my YouTube video later on. The cons of succulents in the landscape is they're sensitive to extreme cold or hail. So they will, as you can see in this lower picture here, this Calandrinia, it's got a lot of pitting going on after a hailstorm. So those are some cons to consider if you live in an area that gets frequent hail or snow. Not very many survive snow, but there are some. And many are sensitive to extreme heat, like for instance, the ones that grow in the Canary Islands. It's very moderate temperature like we have here in Half Moon Bay. So many won't do well in extreme heat. They break easily, so you don't want to plant them near pets or children that could damage them. They're dangerous if they're spiky, so you have to consider that. If you're planting on the street, you don't want to hurt your neighbor's children or dogs. They can rot if too moist for too long, so that is a problem with holding so much water in their stems and leaves. They easily rot if they're overwatered and kept moist for too long. First, I'm going to discuss some pre-planting considerations so that you get your site prepared before you go out seeking plants. And then you have to know your site. You have to know how much sun does it get, how much shade does it get, what's the soil like, what's the drainage like. All of these are considerations you have to tune into before you actually go out looking for plants. And ideally, you want to mimic the natural environment of where the plant grows. And we'll be discussing each of these individually in the next slides. For instance, a spiral aloe, the one on the left here, that grows in 7,000 feet elevation in South Africa, a plateau in South Africa. So it requires a lot of drainage. And it can be covered in snow in the winter. So you know it's cold tolerant. So you've got to kind of do your research and figure out where these things come from, and then you'll have a better clue as to how to grow them in your own garden. This Dudleya down here is a California native, and notice it's growing out of a crevice in a rock. So that's how they grow around here. And a devil slide as well. We have them falling off devil slide all the time from rock crevices. And then these agaves are in Sedona, Arizona, and just growing on their own in the wild. And as you can see, they don't require many nutrients or much water, and they do like the heat. So just give some consideration to where these things grow before you actually plant. The sun, let's briefly discuss sun and photosynthesis. Basically, you all recall that the plants get energy from the sun as we do. And in exchange for the light, well, they use the light and the carbon dioxide from the air, and then they give off oxygen, and they produce carbohydrates, which is plant material and root material. And that's the cycle for plant growth. Also, consider your sun and shady areas when you're looking at your site. If you're looking at it in midsummer, this north side of your house is going to be in pretty bright sun. But as the solstice changes from winter solstice to summer solstice, you're going to have a lot more shade on the north side of your house. So just keep all of those things in mind when you're deciding where to plant things. You don't want to necessarily plant an agave on the north side of your house if it needs full sun. Most succulents require 4 to 6 hours of sun per day. And I have people coming into my nursery all the time and saying, well, I want a house plant. can you give me a house plant? And I go, well, nature never intended them to grow indoors, but if you have a sunny window with at least 4 to 6 hours of sun, you might be successful. So always consider the sun. It's the source of all energy. Indirect or morning sun is best in hot climates for most succulents. And keep in mind that the variegated or the yellow leaves prefer less sun, or they can sunburn. And more sun usually improves the color. Actually, the more stress, the more sun a plant gets, usually the more colorful it gets, redder or pinker, for instance. Here's an example of an Echeveria elegans in the lower left here that was grown in full sun. See how pink the edges are and how plump everything is? And then this one on the right is the same plant grown underneath another plant. And see how elongated it is and stretching to reach the sun. So that's what happens.
See slides.
Someone's talking, I guess, and it is not muted there. Anyway, so so this is what happens when you grow succulents in the shade. They elongate and stretch out looking for the sun. And here's an example of sunburn. If you get too much sun on a sunburst Aeonium or a kiwi Aeonium, this is what can happen. This rarely happens in Half Moon Bay. These pictures were taken not necessarily in Half Moon Bay, but the edges here of this sunburst are brown. And that's because this sunburst Aeonium happens to be more yellow than green. So if you're choosing a sunburst Aeonium, choose ones that have a little more green on them and you'll be more successful in growing them in your garden. Here are some low light favorites. If you have a shady area along the north side of your house, for instance, these tend to grow fairly well on my north side of my building. Agave attenuata variegata over here. Agave attenuata spelled ray of light on the upper right. And this is a variety of Aeoniums here. And this is a Portulacaria afra variegata. This is a yellow leafed variety of the Portulacaria, which is also called elephant food, by the way, because elephants love this in Africa. Now, let's talk about sun-loving succulents. If you have a really sunny area, then these might be some really good choices for you. Cactus are always a good choice.
Janice, I think you're muted there. If you can hear me, Janice, you're muted, I believe. Janice, I'm sorry, we can't hear you there. If you can hear me, you're muted.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know why that's happening because I can see where the mute is and I'm not usually putting my cursor anywhere near there. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Sorry.
There we go.
Okay. All right. What did I miss? Should I go back and talk about this slide or the slide before?
This slide.
This one.
Oh, everybody should be muted by Can. That would help. And then I
you can start over here, Janice.
On the sun-loving succulent one page. Okay. Okay. You can hear me now, right?
Yes, you're good. You're good.
Okay. So the sun-loving, if you live in a warm environment with a lot of sun, then these are good choices for you, except for Half Moon Bay Euphorbia sticks on fire. Doesn't do great here unless you've got a lot of drainage and a lot of warmth. So if you put it on the south side of your house against your building, chances are you'll be successful in growing this. The Opuntia is a cactus, and apparently it does very well in heat and sunny situations, although I don't have experience with it. And of course, these assorted agaves here, they always love the sun, except for the yellow variegated ones. You may not want to give them as much direct sun if you live on the peninsula side. In Half Moon Bay, they can handle full sun here fine. And this Portulacaria afra is also called elephant food. This is the green leafed variety, and it tolerates sun better than the yellow leafed variety. Sorry, my mouse is giving me fits. Let me go back to, I think it's because my mouse is moving from one screen to another. And I'll use my enter key, that solved that problem. Okay, climate and temperature. As I said before, most succulents prefer moderate temperatures, 60 to 80 degrees. If you live in an environment like that, they're going to do superb. We unfortunately in Half Moon Bay actually have a little hail. Past couple of years, we've had a little hail, so it's not perfect for growing succulents. But I know I have a garden in Burlingame that I've done, and oh my gosh, it's perfect. There's not a pit in any leaf from any hill. It doesn't freeze there at all. The temperature is ideal year round there, I think. So that garden in Burlingame is prolific, and I'll be showing you pictures of that soon. So to protect from hot frost and hail, you want to use maybe a lightweight row cover material if you anticipate any hail. That way you can protect your little sensitive agave attenuatas and your aeoniums, which may get pitting from the hail. And this Calandrinia, as you can see, is also very pitted from hail. The cold hardy succulents, if you live in a colder environment, these are pretty good choices. Usually the characteristics for them are they have deeper root systems such as aloes, sempervivums, and agaves, or they have less juicy leaves such as some agaves, opuntia, sempervivums, yucca, delosperma, creeping sedums. And keep in mind that cold temperatures usually improve the colors of them, just like heat and sun improve colors of succulents. Next up are some heat-tolerant succulents. We've already discussed the sun-loving ones, but some that can tolerate heat can't necessarily tolerate too much direct sun. But all of these do well in heat. And those are agaves, cotyledons, Oscularia deltoides in the middle here, this Portulacaria afra. This is a yellow leaf variety, and it can handle heat, but not as much sun because of the yellow in the leaves. And this Kalanchoe down at the bottom as well. They can handle heat fairly well. The heat and sun-loving succulents, this is a repeat of the prior slide. I just thought I would point out that, these are the ones that can handle both heat and sun. I won't go over them again. Now, if you have extremes in temperatures, let's say you're from the valley, Modesto or someplace, and you get extreme heat and cold, more cold than we have here in the peninsula, then these might be some good choices for you. These are all agaves, and they're very beautiful plants. Some grow monster size, as you'll see, and some, now they've got some hybridized ones that stay a little bit smaller in size, 3 to 4 feet, that are more manageable in the garden. But all of them will have these little spiny ends, except for the attenuatas and this one on the left, the agave blue flame. It's a little less spiny and dangerous than others. It's a nice choice for the landscape. Next up, another pre-planting consideration is your soil. And this is key to I should say, thriving succulents, key to their health. The blacker the soil, the more carbon it contains. So just keep that in mind. If you have very light colored soil with a lot of rocks, it can grow some succulents successfully, but not all. Agaves don't require as many nutrients as other plants, or cactus don't require as many nutrients. So you'll probably be successful with any soil you have, just about, if you make the right choice in succulents. Just a brief overview of the carbon cycle. The carbon is taken out of the air through photosynthesis, and basically plants can take and then sequester it into the soil through photosynthesis, excuse me. And then plant roots release carbon into the soil, and then dead materials such as dead and decaying animals, compost, leaf litter, or mulches can also help retain some carbon in the soil. So the idea is to retain as much carbon in the soil as possible, reducing our greenhouse gases and our climate change. I'll just touch on this briefly, but this is key to successful gardening, whatever you're gardening. The soil, it's called the soil food web. Google it and find out more about it. But it's all about how microbes are critical to all life on Earth, and they're in the soil. There's more microbes in 1 teaspoon of healthy soil than there are people on Earth. And these microbes are far more beneficial than pathogenic. Not all bacteria are bad for you. Most are very good for you. So be kind to your microbes. I tell that to everybody. Be kind to your soil, be kind to your microbes. Feed the soil life what it lives on. And that's roots. The soil life lives on roots and decaying plant material or decaying people even, you know. we're soil food, soil life food. So I'll let you review this on your own, but there's this whole web going on in the soil where they feed off each other and in turn release nutrients. These little microbes and all these insects in the soil, they in turn release nutrients to the plant when they need it. And that's key to the health of the plant, is feeding the plant what it needs when it requires it. Ideal soil, I wish we all had this, but we don't. Half of it should be pore space or water, interchangeable. 20% should be clay because it retains water and nutrients, and you want to retain water and nutrients. 40% should be silt, ideally. 40% should be sand. And if you have too much sand, then you shed the water and the nutrients out of the soil and it doesn't stay in the soil as long. And at least 5% of the soil should be decomposed organic matter or humus to improve soil structure and feed the soil life. This is an example of some soil I had in my backyard parking lot. On the right came from my parking lot. On the left, it came from a garden bed that had been mulched for many years. You notice a difference in color. This is much darker, has more humus carbon content, and this is much lighter and more compact in nature, much more dense. So this is what mulch and compost and feeding your soil can do for your soil. It can open up the pores of your soil. The little worms start moving through and creating pores. And even though this is a hard, compact soil by nature, if you feed it, it will open up and thus feed the plants in turn. Occasionally I encounter soil like this, and this was at Ocean Colony here in Half Moon Bay. A lot of people, unfortunately, have this as their soil, and I think it's because a lot of the topsoil was scraped off and put on the golf course. So everyone was left with this hard, moldable, yellow clay soil. Now, if you happen to have this kind of soil, then yes, you do need to amend it. But otherwise, you can take a soil like I had under my parking lot, and just through amending it for a couple of years, it can open up and become a very good workable soil. This, on the other hand, is not a very workable soil. So you will want to add in 3 to 4 inches of the mixture that I have listed here into the first 6 inches of the soil. So you want to add 1/3 fine redwood or wood shavings, 1/3 quality compost or aged horse manure, and 1/3 pumice, coarse sand, or very small lava rock to add porosity to the soil so it drains better. Proper drainage is key, as I've indicated with succulents. If they sit in water, they will rot. So choose higher versus lower elevations for your succulents. Create mounds with rocks, and rocks also add a lot of dimension and interest to the garden. So add some rocks in, make some mounds, but add 3 or 4 rocks around in a circle and mound it with some soil in the middle, and then you've got a little. You're improving your drainage and you're improving the look of the garden at the same time. Avoid downspouts and sump pump outlets. Stay away from those. In this garden on the lower left here. We had a drainage issue. You'll see this black tube that is going along the ground here, and that is diverting the downspout away from this succulent garden I planted in the background here. So yeah, be very leery or wary of where your downspouts are and where your sump pump outlets are, because your succulents will not do well there. So also keep in mind garden size. I have some people that come to me and say, oh, I want to do my whole front yard in succulents. And I go, well, I don't think you want to do the entire yard, because walking through them to get to the way back of your garden, you're going to do a lot of damage. So I would suggest you break it up somehow, or make it a small garden size. That would be ideal. If you could just limit the size to an arm's reach, or put a rock in the middle you can step on. That helps immensely. So think small when you're thinking succulent gardens, or you can create paths, as I will show you in the next slides. And keep in mind, if you put succulents on the street and you don't want dogs jumping in and breaking them, there's little wire border fences. It's hard to maybe see for you, but here, there's a little wire border fence that I put. It's 18 inches high all the way around the outside of this, and that kept the dogs out of there and stopped the breakage from happening. It didn't keep people from plucking samples of my succulents, but it worked with dogs. The cameras helped with the theft though. That helped immensely. Okay, so garden size here again, here's how we created some pathways and access points for the gardens. On the left, this is a pathway this neighbor of mine created in her succulent garden with the decomposed granite. Here's a pathway another client of mine created with stone steps. And then these are little footprint stepping stones in the middle of this succulent garden. So those are some ways to break up your garden. So that covers the pre-planting considerations. And I wondered if anyone had questions at this point.
And the questions can be just in a form of in the chat. If there are any current questions, you can type it in. I do see one question for you, Janice. Is Portulacaria same as a jade plant?
No, it's not a crassula. It may be, yeah, it is actually called Portulacaria afra, and I don't believe it's from the jade family. But I could be wrong, but I don't think so. It's easily looked up. It's easily Googled and figured out though, yeah.
And what are peep and hens?
Oh, hen and chicks?
I think that's what they mean, hen and chicks, yeah. Hen
and chicks. Well, I'll be discussing more about those varieties of succulents. The sempervivums are typically called the hen and chicks because they pup. They create little pups, which are called the chicks. And Echeverias, there are many Echeverias that do the same thing. And I'll try to point that out as I go along in the next part. And what is the ideal soil for succulents? The ideal soil is the one I put on the screen previously. And if you have too much clay, you can amend it, and I'll be discussing amendments later on top. You can just add it on top. You don't necessarily have to till it in. If you have really heavy clay soil, that's when you really have to amend it heavily and till it in. But I'll be going over that in future slides. And could you repeat the components of the 1/3 soil? So if you're having to amend heavy clay soil, it was 1/3. It was 1/3 of redwood shavings or redwood fines, or shavings, wood shavings, 1/3 of pumice or rock or perlite to lighten it up, and 1/3 of I think I don't remember now, but I'm going to be going over that again too. Okay. All the amendments, yeah. Shall we move on to the next topic? Okay, yeah, let's do that. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about landscape design. This happens to be my neighbor's garden, who I always showcase hers because I thought it's such a beautiful space she created here. It's much larger now. But this is the best view that I had from a few years ago, but I think it's pretty gorgeous. It's on Poplar Street in Half Moon Bay if you want to check it out on the east side of the highway. So here we're in Design Basics, we're going to talk about color and contrast, shapes and textures, and heights and layers. And this is the garden on Howard Avenue in Burlingame that I did. And here you can see an example of how I've got different colors here and contrasting colors and different shapes, and the height is in the back so that the front plants can be viewed more easily. So we'll be going into all of that in detail. Let's see how much time it is. Okay. Color. Yes, we're going to be discussing the color wheel, but this is a garden that another master gardener, Cynthia Nations, this is her backyard. Isn't it gorgeous? And she used all the color components here that I'm going to be discussing to create this lovely space. I'm going to refer to this color wheel because I kind of like to group some of my vignettes into warm tones or cold or cool tones. And this kind of best describes it in visual terms. On the left, you've got your reds, orange, and yellows. On the right, you've got your violets, blues, greens, and yellow greens. And you'll see that in the vignettes that I show you in the next slides, how I incorporate this, and as well as the complementary colors as well. Here's an example of using complementary colors. All colors opposite each other on the color wheel are considered complementary, and they really highlight each other very well. On the top, we've got a Schwarzkopf Aeonium with its yellow blooms. It's very striking. And you can see also examples of the red-green in the lower right and the blue-green in the lower left. And this one is the purple and yellow. I use this a lot in my gardens to lend pops to the garden. Here are an example of similar hue and cool color combinations, or you could call them pastels if you like. But I tend to do this on occasion in certain vignettes just to bring out, I don't know what I describe it. I'm not a true artist in nature, so it's hard for me to find the words to express it as an artist would, but I think you get my gist. And I have all these listed here for you. And when you receive a copy of this PowerPoint, you can read all the names of these later as well. So the warm colors, here's an example of using the warm tones, those earth tones. The greens and the reds and the yellows. I find that very soothing, as well as the cool colors. We've got Agave Attenuata ray of light in the middle, the Aeonium canariensis, and the Aeonium sunburst here, some Graptopetalum along the border, and an evening glowformium, which we'll discuss later as a complementary plant to go with succulents, to plant with succulents. Here's an example of using contrasting brightness. This is a Phormium black adder, which I use quite a bit, along with some kiwi aeoniums and Crassula capitella campfire. And here's a grouping of Aeonium Schwarzkopf on the top, sunburst aeoniums here, and a Mardi Gras aeonium here. Here's how you can incorporate shapes and textures to lend interest in the garden. So note all the different shapes of these leaves. This is a deltoid type of leaf here. This is a rounded leaf, and these are just a little pointed. As well as this is Ruth Brancart's Brancroft garden in the East Bay. And notice the different textures here in the lines, how beautiful that is, as well as this vignette here. The Phormium's accent. This vignette, I think, quite eloquently. So the colorful companion plants that I use for height are primarily phormiums because they seem to be the hardiest ones for me, the easiest ones to grow. I've also used a cordyline here, but when I put them in the garden, they oftentimes fail on me, and I'm not sure exactly why, but these phormiums up here, the black adder, such as this one in the lower right and the upper left, those are very easy to grow and very hardy and very drought tolerant. And they lend some height and a different texture to the garden that lends more interest to it. You can also use leucadendrons. They're also very nice, and they have year-round color with their leaf bracts. Those are not necessarily their flowers on the end. Those are called their leaf bracts. So they stay looking like this for much longer than a flowering plant would. And over here we have a Bechernaria eucadoides flamingo glow. The flamingo is misspelled, excuse that, I'll have to correct that, but it's flamingo glow. And as I said, black adder down here. Now let's talk about varying heights and layers. This is the garden on Howard Avenue in Burlingame and now it's really so much larger, I can't believe it. This is a perfect garden. If you've ever seen a perfect garden, this is it. The Aeoniums are twice the size of normal. Every plant grew twice the size. And this is a combination of perfect soil, perfect climate, perfect drainage, I think, and perfect watering. So I'll show you another picture of it later on, but this one is, I've got some thrillers, fillers, and spillers in here that I'm going to be discussing in the next slides. So the thrillers would be the tall specimen plants in the back. The fillers are the lower ones that surround the thrillers. And the spillers I call ground covers as well. And they're low to the ground and cover the ground and spread. These are key components to designs, and a lot of people use this in designing pots, for instance. Here's some examples of thrillers. In this, my neighbor's garden, she's using this art piece as one, draws your eye to it. And also this yucca tree, that's an aloe tree on the left. And this agave americana here on the lower right. All of these are considered your thrillers or your specimens that draw your eye. And consider your vantage point when you're looking at this. This happens to be on the left side, it happens to be more of an island in a garden. So you want every side of it to be viewed easily. So you place your tall piece in the center. This happens to be a fountain that they converted into a planter. And it's really a nice way to view a circular garden with something tall in the middle like that. Now here's examples of fillers, or the lower lying plants that don't get quite as tall. And they lend a variety of colors or textures as well. You can also use rocks as fillers, and they don't need water, can't beat that. And then you've got your Aeoniums. They make great fillers, and there's more Aeoniums over here. And this is an Echeveria afterglow here. And then the ground covers that I like to use, and I'll list my favorites later on as well. This is just a brief introduction to them. But choose plants that contrast with the soil color to add visibility. One thing I did in the beginning when I first started gardening is I would plant the darker colors, and you never see them, or the small leafed ones. And then you have to like really squint to find them. Or the ones that die back in the winter. There's a lot of sedums that die back in the winter. They're very pretty when they're growing in the summer and spring, but when they die back in the winter, you've got a bare space. So consider their longevity in the garden too. Here's what I call poppers, those brightly colored things, or the accent plants that draw your eye. And most of the time they're like the pinks, because in the garden, you've got a typical green garden. Most people have green everywhere, right? So you want to incorporate as much color as possible in different colors. And those draw your eye as well. So I typically use Aeonium Sunburst as a popper, and this Echeveria Afterglow. I use a lot of those, or the Crassula Red Pagoda here, or the Crassula Campfire. And then there's this nice little ground cover called Sedum Rupreste lemon ball. And it's really a bright yellow, and I tend to use it a lot as filler in the garden after I'm done planting the primary plants. Now, some succulents will take over on you, so you have to really be wary of what you're buying. You can read the label and it might say it'll spread 2 or 3 feet, but in actuality, if you've got great soil, it'll spread double that, as I found. So when an agave says, oh, it's going to reach a maximum of 6 feet, don't necessarily believe that. You know, it can probably get to 8 or 10 feet in ideal soil conditions and climates. These are the ones I use for large spaces: the Calandrinia down here, the rock purslane, and the Aloe arborescens, torch aloe. That gets huge, 6 by 6 or more. There's Aeonium cyclops in the back. It gets to be about 4 feet tall. Crassula ovata jade is over here on the left. That gets very, very large. Anyone can grow jade. You know, all you need to do is break off a piece of it and throw it in your neighbor's yard and they've got a jade plant. So it's really easy to grow. Agave americanas get huge. This one gets about 5 feet. This Medio picta alba. Porlacaria afra, that's one, as we discussed before, the elephant food one, that can keep spreading and spreading, and it gets maybe about 3 feet or so in height, but it keeps spreading. And Bulbine fructensis is here, and that keeps spreading as well. So just keep that in mind, that these things may start small, but they end up very large. And then this Aeonium, I'll just call it the Canary Island Aeonium because I can't pronounce it, or the giant velvet rose, that's right here. And that also gets extremely large and keeps spreading and spreading, as well as this Catalina here in the front. This is my demonstration garden in the rear of my nursery behind my building. And come see it sometime. I love sharing my knowledge with people, and then you get to see what they actually look like in a garden setting before you actually buy the plant. This is an example of how fast an agave can grow. This agave right here, in my backyard, this picture was taken like today, 7 feet by 7 feet at least. It's only supposed to get 6 feet. And this is only a 5-year-old plant, keep that in mind. So if you buy one of these, you've got to have the room for it. Don't be scrimping on the space for it. And moving agaves is not much fun because there's sharp edges everywhere. Now here's my favorites. I'm going to discuss a little bit more in detail in each slide. This Calandrinia Spectabilis, rock purslane, it blooms almost year round here on the coast. It's amazing. And it does grow on the peninsula, but I think maybe in the hotter climates, it wouldn't do as well. And it's just a prolific bloomer. It's wonderful, but it spreads and it keeps spreading. So over here in the lower right, you'll see an example of one that's doing very well. And this one, for some reason, did not do very well. And I think maybe someone poured a beer in it because it's outside Mezzaluna restaurant. Maybe, I don't know what happened to it, but I cut it way back thinking that would help, revive it. And in the end, it died for unknown reason, unknown ideology. We just don't know why it died exactly, but sometimes that happens. But this is what I do to these to keep them thriving from year to year. In winter, I will cut them back, way back like this, and they'll be ugly for a while, but then they come back beautiful once again. And the gophers do like them, but usually if they'll eat them for a while and then they'll suffer a little bit, but then they'll start rooting again. That's what's great about succulents and gophers is that even if a gopher starts eating the roots, the succulent rarely dies from it. The gopher will move on and then it will start re-rooting right where it was. So I rarely ever lose a plant to gophers, knock on wood. Okay, and then what else? Let's go to, this is another favorite of mine, and this is my spiral aloe in my backyard, in my demonstration garden, and it's been there for about 2 years. It's finally just loving it spot. In the beginning, it struggled. It's not the easiest plant in the world, but it's beautiful. And this is what it could look like by next year. I'm sure it will look like this on the right here. Here's some of my favorite agaves. The agave blue glow on the left, that gets to be about 3 or 4 feet wide and tall. And this agave blue flame here. And then this quadricolor agave in the front. And then this Queen Victoria, which stays relatively small. There's a porcupine version that gets 12 inches and this one gets about 18 inches. So it's relatively small, but it's quite beautiful, but slow growing, very slow growing. These other agaves are a little faster growing than this one. So you have to have patience with the Queen Victorias. And here's some of my Echeveria favorites. The afterglow, as I've alluded to in the prior slide, is beautiful pink color and pretty hardy in the landscape. This Conte is a parent of this afterglow. The afterglow is a hybrid of this Conte and one other purple Echeveria, which I'm not sure of the name of it, but this is a beautiful plant as well. It doesn't tolerate as much sun as this one though, and it's a little finicky to grow. This is the elegans, and some people refer to this as hen and chicks because it keeps pupping and making little chicks around the mother plant. So this one I use routinely in gardens and it always looks good. It doesn't dry out around the edges like a lot of these do. And it looks perfect year round. And then this one down here is a Lady Aquarius, a ruffled Lady Aquarius with pink edges, which I also love a lot. Here's I've alluded to this already, but my Aeonium Favorites, the Swartkop, the dark rose, or they call it black rose, and the Sunburst here in the Mardi Gras. And here's the Aeonium Sunburst in the garden in Howard Street in Burlingame. This thing is perfect. It's got to be about 3 feet tall and wide, not a scar on it, and it's just gorgeous. So go by and take a look at that one. It's near the school on Howard Avenue in Burlingame. And this is an Aeonium kiwi here. Here's my ground cover favorites, the Calandrinia pumila. It's a flower dust plant. I think this is a sedum palmari. I'm not quite certain of that. I could be wrong. But this Oscularia deltoides is really a great one as well. It spreads quite a bit. It gets to be about 3 or 4 feet in width if you have really good soil. And then this Crassula Campfire is a great choice as well. Excuse me, this is the Crassula Campfire. This is the Crassula Red Pagoda. And then this is that sedum I referred to in the past, the lemon ball. Now, if you're seeking to attract pollinators through your garden, here's some really good choices. The Calandrinia, the bees love it. So this is the Calandrinia that I mentioned, the rock purslane I mentioned before. The Aloe arborescens, the torch aloe, the Aeonium cyclops when it blooms, all the Aeoniums when they bloom attract pollinators. And this sedum autumn joy is a great pollinator attractor, bee attractor. And the hummingbirds also love this torch aloe. And then you could read this chart for yourself if you're interested in attracting other butterflies, for instance, and others. I'll let you read that at your leisure. So any questions about landscape design at this point?
We've got quite a few here, so maybe we'll just address a few real quick.
Okay.
What succulents are good for slopes? I'm guessing like erosion, slope control, and things like that.
Oh, there's, you want a plant that has roots that will, as the plant spreads, it spreads its roots. And that would probably be like the sedum rupestres, any that creep and root at the same time. You know what, I don't have a really good list of that in my mind right now, but those ground covers that creep and root as they grow, probably the ground cover choices would be some of the better ones, I would say.
Okay. And the next one's a pretty good question. Do you fertilize your garden annually? And if so, what do you use?
I'm going to talk about fertilizer in the next section, I believe. Yes. And I I don't use synthetic fertilizers. I prefer to use nature's way of fertilizing the soil, which I will be discussing at length. So let's wait for that.
Okay. And can plants survive indoors? I'm guessing succulents survive indoors.
People are successful in growing them indoors to a certain extent. You can put them in a sunny window with at least 4 hours of sun is ideal. If you put them on your desk in your office, they'll go for a few weeks, maybe even a few months, but then they're going to start stretching and elongating between their leaf region, their stem regions are going to elongate, and you're going to have a long pulled stretchy plant. And then that's an indication it's not getting enough sun.
Yeah. So on the same question here, can you talk about succulents that can grow in part shade, maybe 4 hours of sun a day, especially in San Francisco?
Yeah, I have that one slide for the shade loving one, the ones that can tolerate less light, the low light ones. So the slide I discussed that was entitled Low Light Succulents, those are your best choices.
What about succulents that can grow in colder climates?
Yes, and if you go back, I know I ran through this pretty quickly, but I think you're going to send out this PowerPoint to people, right, Ken? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So they'll be able to review those slides, and I had certain slides that were better for cold climates and heat, like agaves, for instance, though they tolerate both cold and heat. Many of them do. So I think if you just go back and review those later, you'll find a lot more information.
Okay, I think we can move on now. There's lots of comments coming in, but let's move on for now.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we're going to talk about care and maintenance now, and that's going to be covering. I'm going to be covering watering and soil amendments, and plant care and pests briefly. Okay. First off, watering. So I'm finding most people tend to overwater their succulents rather than underwater them. And then they end up with rotting succulents or just using too much water that is unnecessary. Let them dry out between waterings. Get a moisture meter, a moisture meter with a 6-inch probe on it. When you put it in the soil and it says dry, then water well until it says it's wet, water to 6 inches in depth, and then wait until it's dry again, because that's what they're used to in their natural environments. They're not used to having it rain every single day, although, many of them have to tolerate that in the winter time. And there are some things you can do to help with that too, if you're planting in the winter, but just don't overdo the water. In Half Moon Bay, I water my in-ground plants every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the weather. If we have a really foggy month, I'll water them once a month. And in pots, it's more often. I water my pots once a week in Half Moon Bay weather, but that's because they dry out so much faster and they have and shallower root systems, less soil, lots of things. Hand watering is great to wash off pests. Try to water in the mornings usually, so it dries out by the evening. And of the drip irrigation systems, I really prefer watering the zone. This is called a Netafim system on the right here, lower right. And that has the emitters built into it about every 12 inches. And it waters the complete zone, not just the individual plant with a little spaghetti tube to it. When you water with the spaghetti tubes, they're problematic in that they oftentimes break, and then you have leaks, and then half the garden doesn't get water and half gets overwatered, and or half the plant gets watered, but not the entire root zone. And you're watering the soil life as well. You're not just watering the roots, you're watering the soil life. And because the soil life requires organic matter, it requires air, and they require water. So they need what we need. And you want to be kind to your soil microbes and give them water as well. And then if you let them, another advantage of letting them dry out is that they're more colorful. They're going to be a lot red. The Aeoniums get a lot redder when they're deprived of water versus keeping them well watered. They stay much greener. Here's some examples of underwatered and overwatered succulents. On the left here, note the dry leaves and on the bottom, well, which is normal for plants to have dry leaves on the bottom, but not this much. But also note the green leaves are also shriveled. So that's a good indication that this plant needs water. And as well as this plant in the middle, notice the shriveling leaves and the aerial roots. When you see aerial roots coming from the stem regions seeking out water, you know that it's not being watered enough. And over here is where in a situation where I've overwatered. This was in my garden, and this Echeveria is suffering with a rot and getting black leaves, and they're soft and mushy and they're translucent. You can really tell if they're overwatered because of the mushiness of them. Next up is fertilizing and amending. So as I said, I don't use chemical fertilizers in any of my gardens as a rule. You know, I just try to feed my plants the way my grandfather fed his plants before World War II, because these synthetic fertilizers came about, you know, after World War II with the atomic bomb, you know, the nitrogen bomb. That's how they discovered that throwing nitrogen out on the ground grows things green. and that's where it all came about. But if you use the principles that our grandparents and our great-grandparents used, I think you're going to have a healthier garden, because growth does not necessarily mean the plant is healthy. Just because it grows large doesn't mean it's a healthy plant. You want your plants to not only survive, but thrive. And to enable them to thrive, you need to give them the proper nutrients they need when they need it, and not necessarily when they don't need it. So, so keep in mind that organic fertilization is sustainable and synthetic is not. You know, we can't keep making synthetic fertilizers using combustion engines. It's just not sustainable, because they pull it out of the air, you know, to make the nitrogen fertilizers. The organic and organic feeds the soil life, as I said, and then the soil life turns around and feeds the plants. When they call for nutrients, the soil life feeds the fungi and the bacteria in the soil. They'll actually work together to feed the plants what they need when they need it. And then synthetic fertilizers, let's say 522, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, they feed the plant directly, and they're not going through the soil. They're not feeding the soil life. They could actually harm the soil life in excess. If you had a really high nitrogen fertilizer and you put too much of it on the soil, you could actually kill the soil life. So you want to be careful with it. And usually they only contain nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, whereas a whole organic fertilizer contains trace minerals and micronutrients as well. And those all help improve the health of the plant. So start your compost pile in your backyard. If you haven't one already, you know, take the composting course from Master Gardeners and learn how to do it. And our mantra, we Master Gardeners, our mantra is feed your soil, not your plants. So we should have bumper stickers on all our cars that say that. So what I do to feed my soil life is I apply a 1/2 inch to about 1 inch of quality compost or soil amendment. You know, Lyngso has a good amendment mix you could use just to put it on top of your garden bed once or twice a year. I also use a lot of horse manure because it's readily available in Half Moon Bay, and it's mixed with the shavings from the stalls, and it makes a great mulch and compost at the same time, but it has to be well-aged, disease-free, and if it's not well-aged, then there's a chance that you could be incorporating the pathogenic bacteria into the soil, so be careful about that. But I tend to use quite a bit of it, and then apply it twice a year, usually like in the beginning of the rainy season and in the spring when the growth starts happening. And then, and also the horse manure, be careful about the fresh stuff, because it also can have weed seeds in it, and then you'll be growing weeds instead of succulents. So that's why it's important to have it well composted, and that destroys the weed seeds if it's well composted and heated through. And then some people prefer to apply fish emulsion, which you can do as well. It's smelly, but it does the trick. It's short-lived in terms of, you know, giving the soil life what it needs. So you might have to do it more frequently, maybe once a month. And compost tea is another great liquid that you can add to your plants monthly during the growing season. There's no need to apply it during the dormant season. And you need to know which succulents are, when their dormant season is. For instance, Aeoniums are growing right now in the cooler months, whereas your other succulents, my other succulents started growing much earlier in the year. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about plant maintenance. Now, people always ask me, oh, what about these dead leaves I've got underneath my plants here? What am I doing wrong? And I'm thinking, you're not doing anything wrong. That's that's natural exfoliation. That's, your skin is constantly exfoliating. And so plants do the same thing. So the lower leaves will turn brown, and you just need to remove them when they're loose enough to remove. It's a little trickier with agaves down here because you can tug pretty hard on those and they won't come out. So you have to maybe cut those off, but this is a natural process. So just keep that in mind. The other things I'm going to be talking about, I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. I'm going to be talking about transplanting, dividing, discarding, or sharing, pruning, and deadheading in the next slides. So here's the example of removing the lower leaves. I took these off and you've got a freshly groomed plant. And now transplanting it's so easy. If you happen to plant things too close together, never fear, because they're usually easily moved unless they're spiky. Then you have to wear really long rose gloves to protect yourself and use tongs and all sorts of things. But I find it very easy to move them around. If I plant my agaves too close together and they start getting cramped, well, then pull the little plants in between them, away from them, or even move your agaves carefully without getting stuck. Their roots are usually only about 6 inches deep, the majority of them, although agaves tend to have much deeper root systems. Also, when cleaning up your gardens, you can divide and depup. And so here's an example of that Howard Avenue garden in Burlingame. I just was there cleaning it up for them. And I got all these pups from these agaves. And because it was just getting so full, I mean, it was getting too big. So I just pulled off some pups from the stems of the agaves, and I've got a new plant. So just share with your neighbors or sell them like I do. And here's an aloe, for instance, that you can divide and you get multiple plants out of one of these aloes. This is a blue elf aloe, I believe. And then down here, if you have an agave americana like I do in my backyard, you're always going to have pups. And I give these pups away routinely. And see all the little ones I've got growing here underneath, one here. This one I pulled out and it was very long. So if you plant an agave americana, just prepare to share with your neighbors. And let's move on to deadheading and pruning. So when your Aeonium blooms for the first time, it's monocarpic, so it does die back. So this is an Aeonium cyclops that gets about 4 feet tall. And this is a remnant of the leaves, and this is a remnant of the bloom. And here I'm taking some loppers and just beheading this plant, because at this point in time, the bees are no longer attracted to it and it's kind of ugly. So this is when you take them off. You're not harming the plant. After you remove it, you're going to have this stub there for a while, but it's okay. It's all right. Here's the Calandrinia. When I tend to prune this, because this keeps spreading and spreading, as I said, and I have to cut it back way back in the winter to stubs. But I just grab the leaves underneath it and I yank. And that's how I prune the Calandrinia. And also, if the flowers tend to get a little dry looking, I'll just cut those off and it just regrows almost immediately. And here we have an Echeveria Favorites. I can never pronounce it, but the flower stalk of an Echeveria. And this one is expired and it's brown. So all you need to do is prune it off here, keep it looking good. And this is Oscularia deltoides, which is that ground cover that I really like, although it doesn't tend to root as it spreads, so it's not good for erosion control, but it does spread quite a bit. It's beautiful. And so I'm always cutting that back. And then I've got new cuttings for plants if I want, or I share them with my neighbors on next door. So don't be afraid to cut them back or move them. They're pretty hardy and they'll survive. Now regarding snails and slugs, those are my worst enemies. Actually, I took this was a Senecio that I had in my backyard, and I wondered what was wrong with it. And then one night I went out with my headlamp on and I discovered, dozen snails on this thing. They just loved it to death. Or if you get little chomps out of the leaves, as you can see up here in this Echeveria, then that's a snail more than likely. And you can go out at night with a flashlight or a headlamp and pick them off like I did. Or you can apply Sluggo, or, it's an iron phosphate product that is supposed to be not harmful to the environment or animals or other birds, for instance. Although birds tend to eat it. So what I tend to do is when I spread it at night to be most effective. So the birds get less of it to eat. But it apparently does not hurt the birds, which is a good thing. And we also, as Master Gardeners, we also have these pest notes. If you go to our site, or if you just Google UCANR or pest notes, Master Gardeners, you're going to come up with a list of all sorts of pests and the remedies on how to rid them from your garden, and in a sustainable way, hopefully, not in a harmful chemical way. There's also trapping them. You can put cardboard down on top of your soil and then lift the cardboard up in the morning and you'll find lots of slugs and snails under there probably. That's one way to trap them. Other people have tried pie tins of beer. I haven't been successful at attracting slugs and snails to it. Maybe I'm using the wrong beer. Maybe it's too cheap. I don't know, but I don't get slugs and snails attracted to the beer I put out. You can also decrease the thickness of the mulch. With succulents, you don't want a really thick mulch. Most of my drought-tolerant perennial other plants, I recommend 2 to 4 inches of mulch for them. But when it comes to succulents, you don't want to get the mulch too thick around the succulents because then it retains too much moisture around the leaves and can rot the leaves. So that's why I use my compost amendment mix as my compost and mulch. And so I only apply maybe a half inch to an inch around my succulents twice a year. And that works well for me. And look around, check for rocks. They hide under rocks all the time. Introduce natural enemies. There are some insects out there. I don't know which they are at the top of my head, but ducks and geese eat them. And so I refer you to the pest note for more information on that. Another pest that I get on occasion, and it's rare that I get aphids in my garden. It's common to get aphids in a potted plant because they're not drawing as many nutrients from their soil. In a potted plant, they have a limited amount of soil and the nutrients are depleted pretty quickly. But in a soil environment where you've got active microbes in the soil, they're always feeding more nutrients to the plants, and the plants are healthier by nature. So they fend off more diseases. They tend to fend off more diseases when they're healthier. Just like human beings, when you're healthier, you're going to fend off more diseases because you've got greater immunity. Well, you can improve the immunity of your plants by giving the soil life what it needs, and that soil life will add greater immunity to your plants. Now, this happens to be an Echeveria that was suffering from aphids, but it was in a pot. So what I did to remedy that situation was I put it in the soil, and within weeks, the aphids were gone. You can also wash them off with a hose. You can take the plant out and actually turn it upside down and put it in a bucket of water and swish it around. And there are some sprays you can use as well out there that are less toxic than others, and I refer you to the pest note for that. But I just don't have a problem with aphids, and lady beetles will also eat them, ladybugs. So you can try to attract those as well through other plants. One pest that I've had a problem with in the past couple of years have been the leaf rolling larva from the cabbage moth. This white little butterfly here with the 2 dots on it. Oh, I have it all over in late summer, usually the spring and summer, both. But it lays eggs, and then you get these little green caterpillars. See the little green caterpillar lower left here? And then it starts eating away at everything, and it starts making little webs in here. And it usually hits the center of the plant, which is the apical tip, which really stunts the growth of the plant and stops its growth. So there is something called microbial insecticide, or Bacillus thuringiensis. Short BT is the abbreviation name for it. It's sold as Thuricide. And I use that, and that's pretty effective. Just spraying it on. And I only have to really use this mostly on my potted plants, not so much in the garden. Occasionally I'll have them attack the ones in the garden, but not as nearly as much as my potted plants. And so that's a safe insecticide that I use quite often when I have to in potted plants. And here's how you can tell if you have them. See this webbing going on here, and the center of the plant being eaten away and the leaves being eaten? That is where the little green caterpillar is hiding in the center here. So look for that. And if you see webbing going on, then you probably have that little critter in there, and you can hand pick them off too and be rid of them as well. So that's another way to remedy the pest. And I think we're just coming to the end here. So So, I hope you've gained some knowledge in this presentation, and I keep adding to this. I mean, it gets longer and longer every time I get it, because I get feedback, and thank you for the feedback, because it's helped me expand my slide presentation. But I'm willing now to take more questions if you have them.
So I'm going to go back and read some of the questions that we may have missed. Let's see here. Okay. There were questions about irrigation that were answered. So how deep should I amend the soil before planting succulents? Rake and perlite or lava rock, is that enough if there is existing soil already?
If you have any type of soil, whether it be sandy or a little bit, some people complain they have too much clay just because it's hard initially, but clay, when I said heavy clay, I meant moldable clay that you can make like ashtrays out of, that kind of clay. That's the soil you have to deeply amend to 6 inches and add those components that I discussed. Other soil, you can simply just plant in, plant your succulent in it, and just, you can put a little bit of the amendment, like the aged horse manure or the amendment mix that you can get from Lyngso as well. And you can put that in the hole as when you plant, and then always keep some on top. And if you do that, that will open up the pores of the soil. The soil life will come to life and actually do all the work for you. And you don't have to do any tilling or work extensively to keep them healthy.
Okay. So going back, there's a question regarding Aloe Cameroni. It says, I fell in love with Aloe Cameroni, but no one in Florida where I live seems to grow them, nor do the mail order places seem to offer them. Any idea why, and are they difficult to grow?
I'm not familiar with all the aloes. I only tend to grow a few of them because they tend to spread so much. They're hard to control in the garden. So Cameroni, I'm sorry, and you're from Florida, my gosh. Florida's someone from Florida. Cameroni. So I wish I could say I knew about it. I know Aloe stricta, I believe, is one that I use in the torch aloe I'm familiar with, and then the spiral aloe, of course, and the smaller ones, but I'm not familiar with that one. I'm sorry.
Okay. So how large do these spiral aloe get?
About 3 feet by 3 feet is what it says. But then again, in ideal soil and weather, you never know. You could get a 4x4, just like my agave.
And what about the Cressula red pagoda? How large does that get?
Oh, that's a spreading one. So they're only, they start out, like 6-inch size or 4-inch size, and they just keep spreading and spreading slowly. The leaves on those are very small. I consider that a ground cover. It's not a very large plant.
Mm-hmm. Regarding soil, are coffee grounds good for succulent soil?
Coffee grounds are typically used to acidify the soil, and most succulents are fine with neutral soil. And if you keep compost or an amendment on top of the soil, that helps buffer the soil. So if you have slightly acidic or slightly alkaline soil, a compost will help buffer it to more of a neutral status. So yeah, I don't. I'm so feeding on me. Yeah, excuse me, I was distracted. Yeah, so no, coffee grounds, I don't see an advantage to doing that. Put the coffee grounds on your azaleas and put them on your blueberries. That's where you should put those.
This question is regarding Cressula golem. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's very large and then started to decline, and they've tried to root sections and have not been successful. One part is still growing, but the trunk is leaning and can't get it to stand straight up. So any remedies for that?
Now, can you spell that for me? I should be Googling at the same time, because that one.
Cressula is a Crassula. GOLLUM.
Not familiar with that one. No, that's a new one to me. But if it's like most jade plants, they tend to get very thick stemmed as they get older, and they can get really trunks on them. I mean, I've seen some jade plants that can be this big around and really juicy. And when you have to cut those back, they spurt water on you. So maybe it's just getting too old and heavy, and that's why it's not being held up any longer. Maybe it's too much water too. I don't know the situation where they live, and I'm not really that familiar with that Crassula as well. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
And then there's a question regarding using decorative stones and gravel as a mulch for succulent gardens.
Good question. I'm a fan of Laura Eubanks, and many of you probably follow her YouTube channel. And I do love what she has to say. But one thing I tend to disagree with is her use of rock as a mulch all the time. And she always talks about her pest and her mealy bugs and her aphids and everything, and how to treat, and she sprays them, with chemicals. And I'm thinking perhaps that's the issue. She's not feeding the soil life. She's adding the rocks for decorative purposes, but they're not really doing anything for the soil life. So I'm a little biased in the sense that, I like to feed my soil life, and I think my succulents are healthier for it. That's my 2 cents on that. There's cactus and agaves that don't mind it because they don't need very many nutrients to thrive. So there are some plants that are fine with it.
So the next question is, what Echeveria do you recommend that stays the same shape and size to create designs?
Well, the Afterglow, the pink one, I use it a lot. And, the initial floret will get quite large. It'll get maybe even 12 inches in diameter. And then as it ages, it loses its lower leaves and it starts to create pups. And then each flower is a little bit smaller than the original mother plant. That's the nature of Echeverias. So, my favorites is the Afterglow, the pink Afterglow, and the Lady Aquarius, because it has a bluish color to it instead of a greenish, and it has the pink edges. There's the Elegans, which is the low growing one, that hen and chick one that I showed you. Those are my favorites, and I tend to use the ones that are the hardiest ones, the ones that hold up in the landscape the best. That's why I didn't show you a plethora of plants. I mean, there are millions of succulents out there. And I could talk for days on the subject if I knew enough about them, but I don't, because I tend to stick to the ones that I know do well in the landscape and are easiest to grow.
So the next question is, there are a lot of pictures floating around on Pinterest of succulents that have just these hard to believe beautiful colors like blues and purples, and the guess that the colors have been manipulated like by either camera filters or dyes. Is this true?
Well, I have noted at Home Depot, occasionally I'll go in there and I'll see they have painted succulents. So some can handle that, but I think you'd be blocking the sunlight and thus the photosynthesis and the growth of the plant. You'd be depriving the plant of photosynthesis and growth by painting them. I mean, there are some very, very colorful ones out there, more colorful than the ones that I presented today, but I would think that they're probably a little harder to grow. That's why I'm not using them. If I saw them around here in other people's gardens, I'd be using them, that's for sure.
Okay. So the next question is Aeonium sunbursts. They get very tall in their stem, and what's the best way to refresh this plant?
Oh, they're probably talking about legginess. I showed you a picture of an Aeonium sunburst on Howard Avenue, Burlingame, that one. That has such a thick stem, it is holding up all of its other florets very well, and there's no legginess involved. So that's a situation where you've got ideal climate, ideal water, ideal soil, and they just hold up themselves very well. Now, I have some that don't get as much sunlight because the Howard Street one gets full afternoon sun, but I have mine growing in more shady conditions, and they tend to not produce as thick a stem and grow as vertically. They tend to lay down a little bit more, and they tend to root as they lay down. They will produce stems from roots from their stems. So if it gets to a point where it's just not pretty, I would just cut it off and then just let it callus over. If you view my propagation video, you'll see how you can take many of these succulents and just dry out the ends for a few days and then put them back in a loose soil, and you've got a new plant ready to go again. You can do that with Echeverias. You can behead Echeverias and start over again. You can do that with Aeoniums. So
the next question is sort of, you had addressed it, but this person lives in hot inland of LA, and they're making a succulent garden near a swimming pool, and they prefer not to have loose soil exposed. So can they use river rocks as mulch on top of wood chip mulch?
yeah, I mean, each to their own. If you really want to put rocks and that's what you're going for, then go for it. Cactus would, if you're next to a swimming pool with a lot of concrete, it's going to be a lot of reflected heat. I remember seeing some euphorbias, sticks on fire, doing really well around a swimming pool in San Diego, and they were all in pots and they were doing wonderfully because they love that reflected heat. And so maybe go with euphorbias and cactus and agaves, and maybe those are your best choices. I would stay away from Aeoniums. Aeoniums come from the Canary Islands. That's a more moderate climate. That's not an extremely hot environment. So just do your research and find out where these plants grow, and then you could probably make some really good choices that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next question is, if the soil is sandy and not clay and the in-ground garden bed is quite full, do you suggest just putting succulent mix on top of this? Maybe remove a few inches off the top first?
If it's really, now when you say really sandy, it's probably not like 70% sand. I mean, if it was like 70% sand, it was on beachy sand or something, yeah, you would have some issues growing anything in it. But they're probably talking about, 50% sand or something, like, instead of the 40% ideal sand. Compost will add stickiness to soil, as well as it will actually yeah, so it improves clay soil by opening up the pores of the soil, but it also adds stickiness or glue to the soil if it's too sandy. So I would just say compost is your best choice there. Keep it on the top of the soil so that the microbes, the bacteria can come up and get it. The fungi can get it as well. Just keep some always on top of the soil, and that will add some adhesion to the soil so it won't drain as much. I mean, you can always mix some into the soil as well before you plant. There's no harm in doing that, but I'm just saying if you're replacing a plant, you don't want to do a lot of digging, then you can just put it a little in the hole when you plant it and put some on top, and you're probably good to go.
Okay, so the next question is, what succulents are recommended for a modern look in a modern landscape?
He's probably talking about straight lines, maybe some agave strictas that have the straighter lines to them. Cactus would probably be appropriate for a modern contemporary look. I haven't really had much experience with contemporary homes to give a lot of insight into that. But I would suggest, you can always watch Deborah Lee Baldwin's YouTubes. And she's written several books on the subject, and I reference her in the end. Actually, before I forget, I want to make sure I cover the acknowledgements in here. But as soon as the questions end, I'll do that. I think we still have time, don't we? Yeah. So Deborah Lee Baldwin, you could follow her channel, or Laura Eubanks. She probably has more experience with that than I do.
I think we pretty much covered most of the questions here. If you want to just address what you wanted to address, Janice.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
for the rest of the questions, we could give resources in the email that'll be emailed out with the recorded link as well as the PDF.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's my video, which doesn't do well showing it via Zoom, but you can always find it by Googling Janice Moody succulents, and you'll probably find my YouTube channel that way. And then, oops, it's actually played it. And then my references, Deborah Lee Baldwin, as I mentioned, other books, I won't go into all of them. Robin Stockwell has a good book on the subject as well. Online resources, of course, UC Davis, just Google Master Gardeners or Pest Notes or UCANR. Anytime you want to find out information from the University of California, use UCANR in your Google search, and that will bring up those resources. And I just want to thank Lyngso Garden Materials for sponsoring this today. And if you have any questions for we Master Gardeners, here's how you can find us. We, of course, don't have office hours any longer, but we have Zoom office hours, I believe. And Mondays 9 to 4, Wednesdays 10:30 to 2, and Thursdays 9 to 4, the different locations. I think you're probably able to drop off samples of plants. If you have issues with plants, you may still be able to drop them off at our offices. I'm not positive on that. I should know that, but I don't. But you can reach us by phone or by email, and our email is on this site here as well. The link is on here. So feel free to reach out and ask us. And if they don't know the answer, we'll definitely research it and get back to you. So thank you very much. So is any